Welcome back. So in this particular video, we are going to do a lot of work around AI. So we are not going to actually integrate AI into our application, but we are going to set up AI service and set up the framework or the infrastructure for doing asynchronous communication and asynchronous processing. Now, if you are new to this particular channel or if you're watching this particular video for the first time, I would like to tell you that this video is a part of a complete series, which is a course on full-stack microservices using React and Spring Boot. And we are building AI-powered fitness application. So if you are new to this channel or if you're new to this video, just jump over to or head over to the description section of this video. You'll find a link to the entire playlist. So be sure to watch the earlier videos as well so that you can have some good context around the source code. Now, coming to the point, we are going to build the AI service. Now, when I say we are going to build the AI service, we are going to set up the AI service that is going to be responsible for talking to the AI models and generating recommendations based on the users data. Okay, now we are going to set up the project, the database, we are going to set up the endpoints, and also entire communication with this AI service is going to happen in an asynchronous way. So we are going to set up RabbitMQ for the same. So we'll set up RabbitMQ, we'll learn how we can send the data to RabbitMQ and also how this particular service can consume the data from RabbitMQ. Right? So this service will be communicating asynchronously, and that is what we are going to be doing. And you will actually learn how you can put RabbitMQ to use. This is not just a normal tutorial, but I'm actually showing you how you can put RabbitMQ to use, how you can integrate it in real world scenarios. So that's the crux over here. So feel free to follow this video. It's absolutely free and watch it till the very end. There are lots of tips and lots of insights, lots of knowledge being shared throughout the video. Okay, and if you like this video, feel free to hit that like button, subscribe, comment below, let me know who you are, where you're joining in from, and what sort of videos you would want to see on the channel. That will help with the motivation that I need to keep building such free courses. I hope you are excited, and I'm excited too. Let's dive in. So now we have two services and one is the Eureka server. We need to add the third one, which is the AI microservice. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to our Spring Initializer and I'm going to create the project over here. Now, what is this AI microservice going to do? It is going to take the activity that is being registered. So here, if you take a look at the database, we have all the activities coming in, okay, from different users, right? And this database will be populated. So right now I have just running activities, right? So this user did running for this much of time. Now, based on this, I would want to generate recommendations for the user or a personalized health plan or something like that. And for that, we are going to make use of artificial intelligence, AI. And this is the microservice that will help us generate the AI recommendations. So that is the sole purpose of this particular microservice. So I'll come over here to Spring Initializer, okay, and I will select the latest version of Spring Boot. I'll make sure Maven and Java are selected, and here in terms of group metadata, I'll say group is com.fitness and artifact is I'll call this as AI service. So I'll just make sure that I keep it in sync with whatever I'm defining for other services. So here the artifact for this is user service, right? So I'm having service name and service in the end. So AI service, user service, that is how I'm terming them, right? So I'm having this will be the package. I have jar selected, Java version 23. You can select the right Java version for you. And I'll make sure I add a few dependencies, right? So I'm making use of Maven. You can make use of Gradle if you wish to, or any other. So out of these build tool, you can select whichever you want to, okay? So here now, what I will do is I'll first make sure that I'll mark this project as a web project. Okay, first thing first. Then I will add MongoDB over here. Okay, MongoDB, because this is going to make use of Mongo in the hindsight. Okay, so that is what I'm going to add, and I don't think we need any other dependency. We'll need one, which is Eureka client. Okay, so we need to make sure that we register it with Eureka server. Right, so this is done. You can explore the pom.xml if you wish to, or you can hit generate and get the zip file for the entire project structure. So I'll just click generate. Now I do have downloaded this zip file, which is the generated project from Spring Initializer to my workspace, and I'm going to extract it over here. So I'll say extract here. Okay, it gets extracted. I'll just delete this AI service zip, and we now have the project that is unzipped. Okay, and here you'll see this project appear. Okay, you'll see automatically this project appear, but this is not being recognized by IntelliJ yet or Maven yet, right? This is not being recognized as a Maven project. And if you go to any Java class, or if you create any Java class, you will see that the syntax highlighting and all is not there. So to enable that, what I'll do is I'll import this, or I'll add this as a Maven project. So I'll select Maven, I'll say plus, I'll go to AI service over here, and I'll select pom.xml. Okay, and I'll make sure that an entry of AI service is being added over here. So right now it's not added, and it's added now. And there'll be like, it will resolve the dependencies. There'll be some sort of processing that will happen as soon as you do this, and it will get the JDK updates and all. And you can see it's now being recognized as a what we call it, as a Maven project, right? So this is being taken care of, right? Now what we need to do is I'll make sure that I register this with the Eureka server, and for that I will go to any other microservice. And we have already done the configuration for Eureka server, right? This is what we need to add, right? So I'll just copy this, okay? And I'll come over here to AI service application.properties. So here we'll have application.properties. You can stick to properties file, or you can rename it to YAML. It's totally your choice and your preference. Okay, I'll just stick to YAML for the purpose of this, and I have YAML now over here. Okay. So I'll update this to YAML configuration. So I'll say Spring application, and I'll say name. And what is the name? The name is AI-service. I'm calling it service over here. Okay. And then I'll paste these, this configuration, and I'll get rid of this. Okay. So this is taken care of. Okay. Now one more thing I need to add over here is the server port. Okay. Now where am I? Where do I run this? So I'll run this on 8082. So user service is running on 8081, activity service is on 8082, and this will be on 8083 in that case, right? So this is done. And what I would do is I would go to the AI service application.java, and let me run this, and let us see if this is running absolutely fine. Okay. It should, without any hassles. Yes, it works fine. Okay, and you can see over here, it is also registered itself with the Eureka server. You can see over here. Okay, so you get this registration status as 204. Okay, now if you come over here, okay, if you come over here and if you refresh Eureka, you will see AI service also appear. Okay, just after a refresh. All right, and it is working on 8083. So you have user service on 8081, 8082 is activity service, and AI service is on 8083. So we have this service created, up and running, and registered with Eureka in our microservices project. Now, once we have the AI service up and running, what we need to do is we need to configure the database, and we need to get it working with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to AI service, and here if you see, we already have added, during the creation of the project, we have added this dependency for Mongo. Right, so we'll be making use of MongoDB over here. All right, and we have this database up and running here. Okay, so if you want, you can create a new database. Okay, so I can add a new database. I can call it recommendation, fitness recommendation. Okay, I can call it something like this, fitness recommendation. Okay, and I can have a collection called you can have a collection called recommendations or something like that. Recommendations. Okay, so this will create the database, or you can even have a same database used for this microservice as well and just add a new collection. It's totally your choice, but I'm maintaining a separate database. Okay, and you can even host this database on a separate server as well. So it's totally your choice. But right now, since we are working locally and I cannot have multiple instances of MongoDB installed, you can just have one instance of MongoDB installed. So I've made use of this localhost MongoDB instance, and I've added two separate databases. Okay, now we'll come over here, and since we have already configured the activity service to work with that of Mongo, what I can do is we'll take a look at the configurations that we have done over here. So you can see this is the configuration that we have done. So I'll just get these configurations. Okay. And I will come over here in AI service, and here I will open the application YAML. Okay. And here I'll paste it, something like this. Okay. Now, what is the name of the database here? So the name of the database is fitness recommendations. So this is the name. Okay. So I'll copy this, or you can, I'll just expand this so that it gets copied properly, like so. Okay. And I'll copy this fitness recommendation. Make sure there are no spelling mistakes. Otherwise, like, you will get all sorts of errors. Okay. This is done. And now what we need to do is we will create a model. Okay. So we'll have a model that represents a recommendation in our application. So I'll click on the main package, right click, and I'll say Java class. And here I am going to create this class inside a package called model, and I'll say recommendation, like so. Okay. And this will be a class. Now here I'm going to have like a private string. Okay. And I'll say ID, like so. And I'll copy this part because this is going to be repeated a bit. Okay. So recommendation, there will be recommendations that will be generated with the help of AI, and that is something that we'll be storing in the database, and it will be stored against the activity. Okay. So we have this ID which represents the recommendation ID. Then we have activity ID, okay, which will reference to which activity this recommendation is generated for. And then we'll also have user ID. We are also keeping track of user ID so that this recommendation is linked to the user as well. And then we will have activity type over here, okay, which will represent the type of activity that we have or that this recommendation is generated for. And then we'll actually have the recommendation over here. Okay, so you can see recommendation, and then we will have the list. So I'll say list of string. Okay, and this will be improvements, something like this. Okay, so let me import this. So this is a normal list. Okay, and we need to keep a track of improvements that we get from the AI model. I'll also have suggestions that we'll keep track of. So improvements, suggestions, any sort of safety measures that the AI is suggesting to us. Okay, and then we can have safety, and then I can have private local date time, and you can say created at. So this should be auto populated. Okay, and I'll have ID being marked over here. Okay, so if you take a look at the activity service, this will look much more similar. Okay, so if you go over here, we have this model activity, and this will look much more similar to that. Okay, and you can see we have this created date and last modified date that we'll be adding here as well as. Okay, so here we'll say created date. Okay, and for making use of created date, we need to enable the auditing as well. Okay, so we'll be doing that, and we need to add a few annotations over here. So I'll say document, and I'll say collection. What is the name of the collection? Recommendations, something like this. And here I'll say data. Okay, so this data is not coming in because we have not added Lombok. So that's the problem. We've missed Lombok. So here I'll say Lombok. We need Lombok. So I'll come over here, and here I will just scroll down. I'll just get this dependency, and I'll paste it in our pom.xml. So here in the pom.xml, I'll just paste this, and I'll reload Maven changes. This is done. And then in recommendation, you should ideally get data over here, and you should ideally also get builder. Okay, so this is taken care of. And now what we will do is we will also have Mongo config defined, okay, wherein we will be enabling the auditing. So we have this Mongo config also defined here in what we call, we have it in AI service as well. So I can just copy this as well. Okay, and I'll come over here in AI service. Okay, and here I can say a new package, and I can say config over here, and within this config package I'll paste the code. Okay, and then this file will be created, and I'll just get this imported. Okay, so this is taken care of now. And the database, so what we have done is we have actually created a model, okay, which is representing the recommendation that is generated via this AI service. We have told our service as to where it can find the database. So we have given the connection string along with the database name. That is something that we have done. we have the configuration defined for Mongo as well. Okay. And now if you rerun the application, it should work. It should run properly without any errors. Okay. So we'll just restart the application to keep a check on that. All right. And let us see if it works fine. Okay. So you can see it's working fine. No issues as such. All right. And it's registered with Eureka server as well over here. So if you refresh, you'll see the service here. Okay. And here, this is also working fine. You won't find any sort of data right now over here, okay, because you have not sent any sort of data or you don't have any recommendations right now, right? So when we start generating recommendations, those will be stored over here. All right. So I hope you have been able to follow along so far, and I hope this has been useful. Right now, it's time that we start defining the endpoints for our AI service. And what I'll do is we will be exposing all the recommendations that are being saved in the database through this particular service. All right. So I'll come over here and I'll create a controller first of all, because that is what we are going to need. So I'm going to create a controller package and I'm going to say recommendation controller. So this is going to help us view the recommendations that have been generated for any sort of activity, right? And I'll also need a repository. So I'm going to create a Java class. I'm going to say repository, something like this. And I'm going to say recommendation repository, something like this. Okay. Now let us set up the repository first. So I'm going to say extends. Okay. And I'm going to say Mongo repository over here. Okay, because you're making use of MongoDB, and I'm going to say recommendation, and this is of type string over here. Okay, this is done. And one thing I missed, this should not be a class, this should be an interface, and I'll mark this as a repository so that it becomes a Spring managed component. Okay, this is taken care of now. Now what I will do is I'll create a service as well. Okay, so here in the controller, I have model. Okay, I don't have service, so I'll create a service over here. So I'll say service recommendation service over here. Okay, something like this. And I'll mark this immediately as a service. And here I'll have private final recommendation repository. And I'll say recommendation repository over here. And I'll add a required args constructor so that this is initialized by Spring. Okay. And I'll get the instance of this into the controller. Okay. So I'll come over here. And here I'll mark this as a REST controller. So I'll say REST controller, something like this. I'll say required args constructor. And over here, I'll say private final recommendation service. And I'll say recommendation service. So this is taken care of. And now we can start defining the endpoints. Okay. So first endpoint that I'm going to have is I'm going to say get mapping. Okay. So 1 second. So this should be get mapping over here. Okay. And I'm going to say public response entity, and I'll say list of recommendations. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the list of recommendations against the user. Okay, so I'm going to say get user recommendation, something like this. And here I'm going to add a path variable. Okay, so I'm going to say path variable, and we'll accept the user ID in the path variable. So I'm going to say string user ID, and I'll have this. Okay. Now this list, I'm getting a red mark, so I'll just import this list, which is good enough. I'll import it from Java util package and not from Java EWT package. Okay. And here I will call this endpoint as /user/user ID, something like this. Okay. And I'll have this entire controller mapped to this endpoint over here. So I'm going to say /API/recommendation, something like this. Okay. Now this is taken care of. Now what I will do is over here, I'll say return response entity dot OK, and I'm going to say recommendation service dot get user recommendation. Okay. So this is something that I'm doing, and I'll say user ID over here. Okay. So this method does not exist yet, but we'll be creating it shortly in a while. Okay. So this is done. This is one endpoint. I'll create one more endpoint, which will help us get the recommendation for a particular activity. Okay. So we have this activity ID, and if you pass in the activity ID, you get the recommendation for that particular activity ID, and I'll have activity ID, okay, over here. Okay, and here instead of get user recommendation, I'll say get activity recommendation, and I'll also rename this method in the service. Okay, and here instead of user ID, this will be activity ID. Activity ID. Okay, and here I'll say activity ID, like so. Okay, this is done. Now we'll create these two methods in the service. So I'll create this method over here. Okay, and I'll say here I'll say recommendation repository dot find by ID. Okay, or find by user ID it should be, right? Find by ID won't work, so I'll say find by user ID over here. Okay, and here I'll pass in user ID. Now this method does not exist in the repository. Okay, and whatever this returns, we need to return to the controller. So I'll get this method created. I'll say a list of recommendation, and we have find by user ID and string user ID. So this is okay. This does not, this should not create any issues. Okay, this is done. Now let's take a look at the second endpoint over here. So this is get activity recommendation. I'll create this get activity recommendation over here. Okay, and here I am going to say return. Okay, return recommendation repository dot find by activity ID. Now this does not exist, but I'll pass in activity ID over here. Okay, and I'll get this created in recommendation repository. Okay, so now this is returning a list, but I don't want a list over here. Okay, so if you're trying to find the activity by ID, I don't want to return a list. So this should ideally be returning an optional over here. Okay, so it will help us evaluate whether the recommendation exists or not, and the rest of the parts are same. Okay, so I've kept the return type as optional, and I'll come over here. Okay, so I'm getting, okay, in the service, not over here in the controller, but in the service. So here I'm getting this. Okay, so this is something that I'm getting, and now what I'm going to do is, so if you hover on this, this is returning an optional of recommendation, and you need a list of recommendation. Okay, but actually this won't be a list. If you take a look at it, this won't be a list. This actually would be just a recommendation. I'll tell you why. Because if you're passing in an activity ID, you get single recommendation against that activity, right? And not a list of recommendation. So I'll rename this, and I'll update this also over here. Okay, so this also will be updated. Okay, and now over here, if you hover, it says recommendation is required type is recommendation, but provided is optional. So what I will do is I'll say I'll come over here, and I'll say or else throw. Okay, or else throw, and I'll have a handling for any sort of exception that comes over. So I'll say no recommendation found, no recommendation found for this activity. Okay, and what is the activity? So activity is this one with the ID 1. Okay, with the ID whatever you pass in. Okay, and I'll change this. Okay, so this is taken care of now. Okay, if there is no activity found, we are throwing this runtime exception with the activity ID over here. Okay, and this is being returned by this this endpoint over here. Okay, now this is done. So what I will do is I'll just restart the AI service over here. Let us restart and let us see if this is working fine. Okay, so the application is restarting, and let us wait for a while. Okay, so it is giving an error. Consider defining the bean of this type recommendation repository in your configuration. So we got this where? Okay, so we got this in the service, I believe. Okay, yeah, in the service. Okay, so come over here, recommendation repository. This is defined right. So for some reason, I think it is not able to work with MongoDB, our application, and there is some problem. And I could identify the problem over here. We have added this dependency of Mongo reactive. Okay, so if you come over here to the browser, we have added this MongoDB reactive. So I'll just get rid of this one, and I'll change this to Mongo Spring Data MongoDB, and not the reactive one, the normal one. Okay, so if you come over here, this is the dependency that we should be working with, and I'll come over here and I'll paste that over here. Okay, so let me paste this. Let me do a sync and let me run this. Okay, so this should now work fine in my opinion. Yes, it does. Okay, so there was a problem with the dependency. We had accidentally added an incorrect one. Okay, so one more thing I would want to tell you. Okay, here in recommendation, I've added these two annotations as well, all args constructor and no args constructor. Okay, in the recommendation. Okay, so I will close everything else over here. Okay, I don't think we need all of these files open. Okay, but we have this controller now running, working fine. Okay, the application is up and running. What I will do is I will head over to Postman. So here in Postman, where is Postman? So here in Postman, I will create a new folder here. Okay, so I'll say add a folder and I'll say recommendations, something like this. I'll add a request. Okay, and here I'll add this. Okay, now over here, I'll just copy this endpoint recommendations. Okay, so that there are no typos. And over here, I can get the recommendation for any sort of user. Okay, so I'll just copy this. Okay, come here and paste this. Okay, now whatever user ID you have, you can pass in over here. Now, let's say we are passing in for this user. Okay, I'll copy this, come over here and just paste this. So this is a get request, and of course, you won't get any sort of data over here. So not found. Why is it not found? Because if you come over here, okay, why is it not found? So, okay, was the endpoint not found? So API localhost. Okay, so this is 8082. This should not be 8082. This should be 8083. So make sure you are querying the right port number. Okay, you get an internal server error. Okay, this is expected because the user does not exist, right? The user does not exist because there is no data. So you can see over here. Okay, so we got some other issue over here, it seems like. Okay, so the issue says ambiguous handler mapped. Okay, so I think we have two handlers mapped to the same kind of endpoint. Okay, so these two are ambiguous. So controller is not able to identify. So what I will do is I'll rename one of them. Okay, so here instead of user, this will be activity, something like this, and I'll rerun this. Okay, let me rerun. Okay, so when the request comes, every endpoint should be unique. Okay, and if the endpoint is not unique, you get this kind of ambiguous controller and sort of errors over here. Okay, so it's up and running now, and if you come over here, if you do this query, it should work fine and you get an empty response. Okay, so empty response because there's literally nothing in the database. Okay, we will be populating recommendations, don't worry about that. But right now I'm just checking if API is working fine. And you can see just to get this 200 okay, we got a few errors, okay, which could have been a roadblock later on. Okay, so here what are we doing? We are getting get user activities or get user recommendations. Okay, all the recommendations of a particular user, and then I'll duplicate this and I'll duplicate this to get activity recommendation. Activity recommendation. Okay, so this is another one, and I'll so this was not saved, so the endpoint did not get copied. So here instead of this, I'll have activity, something like this, and I'll have activity ID as 1 maybe. I'll just run this, and you get internal server error because the activity with this ID is not found, right? So if you scroll up, okay, if you scroll up here somewhere, no recommendation found with this activity. Okay, so this is an error that we are generating by ourselves. Okay, we are generating by ourselves. So if you click over here, recommendation service Java 21, this is where this exception is being generated over here, right? So this is the moment you get this exception, it means it's working fine. Okay, because this is something that you have written. All right. So yeah, the APIs are working fine now for recommendation. Now the thing is we need to populate recommendations, and we'll be doing that. Okay, so I hope you have been able to follow along so far, and I hope this has been useful. Welcome. So now it's time that we begin talking about the asynchronous communication, and we will talk about this in the context of these 3 points. Okay, so first we'll discuss a problem that we have in our application. Then we'll talk about how what are event-driven microservices and how they can help, and we'll do an introduction to RabbitMQ and we'll understand what RabbitMQ is and how it works. Okay. So first, let's talk about the problem statement over here that we have in front of us. So right now here in the application, we have the activity service. Okay. So here you will have a controller, okay, which is doing the job of accepting the activities or tracking the activities against a particular user. Now, the thing is, user is logging their activity, and this activity can be running, cycling, weightlifting, and every activity has some parameters related to it. Like, for example, if he was running, what sort of running was he doing? What was the intensity? What was the duration? How many calories did he burn? And all of that is coming in this activity request over here. Okay, so if we have any sort of additional metrics, we have this open-ended field over here, which user can send in with their data, right? Now, if it's weightlifting, the user can have data like what sort of weights he did and for how long, what are the calories he burned, all of that. Even for cycling, same thing. There will be some cycling related parameters that will come in. Okay. Now, the thing is to enhance the user experience. Of course, one way is you store this activity and you just show this activity to the user in the application that you're building on the front end. Another way is the app generates a personalized set of recommendations based on the activity data and whatever activity data is being put up in the app. And this way, the application has an opportunity to personalize the app and add more value for user. Okay. Now here, what we can do is we can make use of generative AI for the same. So here we have AI service. So activity service is different, AI service is different. So once the activity is posted in the application, in the activity microservice, and it's saved in the database, AI service can come into picture. It can pick up the activity that has been just posted and it can process that activity and generate some real-time personalized recommendation based on the data, and it can store the recommendations in the application for future retrieval. So this is what we can do. And with the help of this, basically, we are providing more value to the user. Now, what is the problem over here? So the problem over here is there is one way of doing thing. Okay. Now, one way of doing thing, you can think of it like once the user posts the data here in the controller, okay, or the data goes via controller, what you can do is you can send this data to the AI service as well, right from here. And AI service will of course talk to an AI model in the hindsight, and it will generate the recommendations and it will store it in the database. Now, the data going to the AI service and then AI service talking to an AI model can take some time, right? If the AI model is slow or if the data is huge, this processing can take some time. And until then, what you are doing is you are basically blocking this, this process over here. Okay. So what we will be doing is we will be following a better approach wherein we'll be making use of event-driven architecture with RabbitMQ and Spring Boot microservices. So instead of making synchronous API call, we'll make use of RabbitMQ for asynchronous communication. Okay. So just leaving RabbitMQ aside, we'll be doing asynchronous communication. Now there are multiple ways of doing asynchronous communication. Okay. You can make use of Kafka as well, which is another service or you can implement in your application and you can make use of it. Okay. But yeah, this is the problem that we have. We don't want to do this thing like generating recommendations synchronously. And for the very reason, the reason for this is because it will slow down the system. Okay. So I want to have a disconnect. Now we'll be making use of event-driven architecture over here where we will be making use of RabbitMQ. Okay. So I'll come over here. This is the diagram. Oh, sorry, not a diagram. This is the website of RabbitMQ. So if you search for RabbitMQ, here is where you will come in. Now, what is RabbitMQ? RabbitMQ is a reliable and mature messaging and streaming broker. Okay. You can deploy it on the cloud environment or even you can install it onto your system on your local machine. Okay. And it is quite popular and there are no cost as such to make use of RabbitMQ. So you can go through this website over here. You can see it helps you decouple interconnected services. Okay, so you have a backend that needs to send notification to the end user. Okay, so what you do is you publish whatever data you want to send to RabbitMQ, and then the other service can pick it up from the queue over there and it can process it. All right. So that is what it can do, and it's free and open source. So this is the major thing. Okay, you don't have to pay anything for making use of it. Okay, so this is what RabbitMQ is. And when we talk about RabbitMQ, there are a few concepts that we need to understand over here. Okay, so for that, I have a small diagram being created over here. Okay, so here you have this producer, you have this consumer. Now this producer is a microservice and consumer is also a microservice. So producer is the microservice that is sending something or it's producing something. Okay, and consumer is the one that is consuming something. And then in between you have something called as queue. Now RabbitMQ has this concept of something called as queue, wherein messages are stored until they are processed. Okay, so in terms of our application over here, once the activity is saved into a database, what this activity controller or activity service can do is it can publish this activity that has been saved into the database and that was new into RabbitMQ queue. Okay, so here the queue that will be created, so it can publish that particular message into the queue, and then the consumer basically can pick up data from the queue one by one and it can process it and it can store the recommendation. Now consumer in our case is the AI service which will be generating the AI recommendation for our users. Okay, so whatever data is being stored in the queue, consumer is going to do the job of picking it up and processing it and then storing the generated recommendation in the database or broadcasting it, whatever logic you want to define there after the recommendations are generated. Okay, but this is a queue. Now this queue is first in first out, so basically the message that enters first is the first one to be picked up on the consumer side. Okay, so it's like a queue, like a normal queue that you will have on metro stations or bus stations. Okay, the first person standing in the queue will be the first one to go out, FIFO. Okay, that is what it is. So it's like a mailbox. Okay, so you publish this, and now the benefit over here, the benefit of doing this over here is that even if the consumer service is down or if the AI model is down, producer just keeps on publishing the message over here. So let's say there are 10 activities that got registered and consumer was not able to process because of some technical issues or some network delays over there. So there will be 10 messages in the queue or 10 activities in the queue that were published, and then consumer can come in and do the job of processing it one by one. Okay, so that is what this particular thing is going to do. Okay, this is what the queue is. Now this queue is something that will be there in RabbitMQ. So when you install RabbitMQ or when you make use of it, you will get access to a dashboard where you will have access to a queue and a producer can publish the data to the queue. Okay, then there is something called as exchange. Okay, now exchange is basically a thing which decides where the message should go. Okay, and it takes the message from producer and routes them to the correct queue. So that is something there. So we also have a concept of routing key. Okay, now there will be a key that will be there which will help RabbitMQ know where to send the message. Okay, so we will be making use of all of this. All right, and I hope you are clear as to how this thing entirely works over here. It's pretty simple. Now if you go to documentation here, if you click on docs over here at the top, you will see queue over here. Okay, so this is what is a queue. Okay, so a queue in RabbitMQ is an ordered collection of messages, and messages are enqueued and dequeued in FIFO manner. So like I said, first in, first out. Okay, and you can define a queue. Okay, it's a sequential data structure with two primary operations, like item can be enqueued and it can be dequeued on the other end. Okay, so that is what the queue is, and you can go through this documentation. Okay, you can take a look at it. Okay, so this is what RabbitMQ is, and we'll be making use of RabbitMQ over here. And yeah, if you come over here to Spring website, so you will find this project Spring AMQP. So this is a project that applies the core Spring concepts to the development of this asynchronous communication. So with the help of this project, you can make use of RabbitMQ into your Spring Boot microservices. Okay, so this is what we'll be making use of. All right. So I hope you are clear as to what the problem statement is, what RabbitMQ is, why are we going ahead with this architecture. Of course, we have a way wherein you could like do everything synchronously. Like when the activity is saved, you make an API call to the recommendations or to the AI service to generate the recommendations for the user. Okay, but that can be slow because AI service will not be generating the recommendations by itself. Of course, you'll have to make use of an AI model, and it might do some sort of thinking. It might take all the users' data into consideration and all of that. So there'll be some processing. So it's best that if it happens asynchronously and not in a synchronous way. All right. So I hope this is clear, and let's jump to the next step. So now it's time that we set up RabbitMQ onto our system. Now there are multiple ways of doing this. So if you are here on RabbitMQ website, just head over to docs and click on getting started. Okay, not on getting started. So just go back and say install and upgrade. Okay. Now here you can see this article that talks about installing RabbitMQ. Now the first thing that you see over here is installing with the help of Docker. You also have different installation ways wherein which you can install on Linux machines, Windows machines, Mac OS. And on Mac OS you have you can install using Homebrew, generic binary build. On Windows you have these installation options, like you can install using Windows installer, chocolatey package, binary build. And on Linux you have multiple options. Now what I'll be doing is I'll be choosing this Docker way of doing things. Okay, so I'll just copy this Docker command. Okay, so before I execute this Docker command, if you are planning to go via Docker, make sure that you have Docker desktop installed onto your system and it's up and running. Okay, only then this command will execute. But let us understand what this command is. So first of all, it says Docker run. Now this Docker run command starts a new container. IT, this is for running a container in an interactive mode, which is useful for debugging. You have this RM over here, which will automatically remove the container when it stops. Then you have this name, which mentions or assigns the name called RabbitMQ to this particular container instead of a random name. And then you have -p, which stands for port number. So this is going to map this port number. So you can see over here, it is mapping 5672 port number from the container to 5672 onto the host machine. So you can basically access RabbitMQ using 5672 port number. And then you have this RabbitMQ, you have this another port number, okay, which is management. Okay, so this is the name of the image. Okay, but this is another port number which you are mapping again to the local machine. Okay, 15672. And this is for accessing the RabbitMQ web management UI, this second port number. Okay, so first port number is for RabbitMQ itself, and the second port number is for accessing the dashboard. So that is something that we'll be doing. And then this is the name of the image that you are specifying over here. Okay, so this is RabbitMQ version 4.0. Now this version might change depending on when you're watching this video, but that's completely fine. So just copy this. So we will copy this command and we will come over here onto our terminal. And here I have the terminal open, and also I have Docker desktop up and running. So I'll just paste this command over here. Okay, so I'll just say paste, and you can see this command here, and I'll just say enter. Okay, so it says unable to find the image, this image locally. So if there is, if this image exists locally, it is going to create a container out of it. But this image does not exist locally on my machine. So it is downloading this fresh, and it will take a while depending on your system and your internet speed. Okay, so you can see it's downloading pretty quick for me, and you'll have to wait for some time until it downloads everything and it creates the container. You can see this is up and running now. Okay, so RabbitMQ is up and running, and you can see over here, if you go to Docker desktop, you can see here this container is up and running. You can see, okay, this is the container and this is the image. Okay, so you have this up and running. Okay, now if you have chosen any other way of installing RabbitMQ, that's absolutely fine. It's totally your call. Okay, but now what we will do is we can access the RabbitMQ management console using this port number. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to say localhost, and I'll paste this, and you can see this RabbitMQ management console, right? And I'm going to type in guest as the username and guest as the password. And the moment you say guest, that is the default username and password. Just you'll be logged in over here. Okay, and you can see over here, this is the interactive dashboard that you get access to with RabbitMQ. And you can see the connections over here, channels, exchanges, queues. And if you go to connections, you will see all the connections that have that exist with RabbitMQ. Okay, there are exchanges. Okay, so there are exchanges. You can see these exchanges. There are queues over here. So whatever queue you create will exist over here. And then you have the admin part over here. Okay, so this is the dashboard that you get access to as soon as you run RabbitMQ onto your local machine. Okay, so I hope you have been able to follow along and I hope this was useful. So now it's time that we begin integrating RabbitMQ into our microservices, and the first microservice that we'll integrate it with is Activity Service. Now Activity Service will do the job of publishing the activity that is being sent to it for saving into RabbitMQ queue. Okay, so here if you go to the controller, okay, we have this controller wherein we are tracking the activity. Now this is calling the service. Okay, now here what we will do is once the activity is received, we will save it into the database. So we are saving it into the database, and we will also publish it to the queue. Okay, the message queue. So what I will do is we will have to first configure this particular microservice to be able to interact with RabbitMQ, and for that we are going to of course need a dependency. So I'm going to come over here, and like I have this link open over here, which is Spring AMQP. Okay, so this will allow us to interact with RabbitMQ. Okay, so what we will do is this is a project, and if you come over here to Spring Initializer, you can make use of AMQP. You can see RabbitMQ. Okay, so here if you see the description gives your application a common platform to send and receive messages. Okay, and if you go to explore, so just be sure like you have selected Maven and latest version of Spring, and see explore, and you're going to see this dependency appear. So just copy this dependency, come over here and head over to the pom.xml of activity service and just paste it over here, something like this. Okay, and just reload Maven changes. So you have this thing added over here, and now what we can do is we can proceed to the next step. Okay, so the next step is wherein we would be doing some sort of configuration in the application.yaml file. Okay, so you can see done now, and we'll come over here to application.yaml. Okay, over here, and here we are going to define some properties. Now this property is going to help us configure RabbitMQ with our application. So we are going to define things like exchange. Okay, now RabbitMQ exchanges makes use of exchanges to receive messages from producer and route them to queues. Okay, so we'll be defining the exchange over here, the queue over here, and the routing key as well. Okay, so I'll come over here. I'm going to say here I'll say RabbitMQ, and I'll say exchange, and here I'll say name. Now you can give a name to your exchange. So I'm going to call this as fitness.exchange, something like this, and then I'll have queue over here, and you can call this queue as activity.queue. Okay, and here you can have routing over here, and this can be activity.tracking, something like this. Okay, so what we are doing is we are first defining the exchange. Okay, now you need this because we'll be making use of direct exchange to send and receive messages. We have a queue over here. Now this is the queue where messages are stored until they are processed, and you must we are defining this queue over here. Okay, we must have a queue. Routing, now this is the routing key over here. Okay, now this defines how messages are routed from exchanges to the queue. Okay, so we'll be making use of this key to send the messages. Okay, so what I'm going to do is now what we need to do is we need to have a configuration. Okay, so I'll come over here, and we have a config package here, this one. So I'll create one configuration over here, and I'll call this configuration as RabbitMQ config. Okay, so I'll say RabbitMQ config, something like this. Okay, so this is a class, and here I'll mark this as configuration. Okay, and I am going to have public queue. So you can see this queue should come in from RabbitMQ. Okay, there are multiple versions of queue. Now which queue you will pick up over here? So we need to pick up this queue, which is amqp.core, and I'll say activity queue over here. Oops, activity queue, and here I'm going to say return new queue, and I'm going to say activity dot queue, something like this. Okay, and I'm going to add a comma, and I'm going to say true over here. Okay, so this is the queue that we are basically adding over here, and I'm going to add a bean over here. Okay, and also what I will do is I need to convert the messages that are being sent into JSON. So I'm going to make use of Jackson message converter over here. Okay, so do I see message converter? Okay, yes, we have message converter, JSON message converter, something like this. And here I'm going to say return new Jackson to JSON message converter over here. Okay, and this will be again a bean over here. Okay, so I'm getting this error when it's saying like I need to do some casting. Okay, so there's some problem. I need to get the message converter from the right package. So this message converter has to be from this package. Okay, so just remember this. Spring Framework AMQP support converter, and this also Jackson to message converter is coming in from the same package. Okay, so be sure to make use of AMQP over here, because we are making use, or we are working with RabbitMQ over here. Okay, so be sure to make use of the right package. Now, what is the purpose of these beans over here? We have created couple of beans here in the configuration class, right? So this first bean, this declares a queue named activity.queue in RabbitMQ, and here second parameter is true. Okay, so this is a queue name, which is activity.queue, and this is the parameter which is called as durable. Now, what does durable mean? So durable means that even if the RabbitMQ restarts, this queue is going to remain. It won't be lost. Okay. Otherwise, if RabbitMQ restarts, the queue and the message will be lost. Okay. So this is needed. And then you have this converter. So this will do the job of converting the Java objects into JSON before sending them to RabbitMQ. Okay. And by default, what happens is, so if you don't have this, by default, RabbitMQ sends messages as raw byte arrays. And with the help of this Jackson to JSON message converter, we ensure that objects are converted into JSON automatically. Okay. And if we don't define a converter, we will have to manually serialize or deserialize the message. So this is better in a way. Okay. So this is done. Now what we will do is we have the configuration setup done. We'll come over here to activity service. Okay, somewhere over here. And here in the service, once the activity is saved, or once the activity is received in the service class, we need to send this or trigger this to the what we call it, RabbitMQ. Okay, so what I will do is I'll have over here, I'll say private string, and I'll say exchange, and here I'll say private string routing key, something like this. Okay, and here I'll have a value. Okay, we'll make use of value over here, and here I'll say RabbitMQ dot exchange dot name. Okay, so what I'm doing is here, if you come to this YAML file, okay, we have this RabbitMQ exchange name. So that is what I'm getting in the service. Okay, and the other part that we have, okay, other thing that we have is routing key. So the routing key is RabbitMQ exchange or RabbitMQ dot routing over here, right? So that is how it's defined. In fact, what I realized is we missed one key over here. Okay, so it is queue, and then this has to be name colon activity queue, and this has to be key over here. Okay, that is how it is. It has to be. Okay, so this is RabbitMQ exchange name, and this is RabbitMQ queue name, and this key is RabbitMQ routing key. Okay, so I'll come over here and I'll copy this. Okay, RabbitMQ, and it was routing, and then this will be key. Okay, something like this. Okay, so I've got this done. Okay, now what we are doing actually is we are basically getting these properties from the YAML file. Okay, and this is being injected. Now what I'll do is I'll scroll down over here. Okay, and once we have the data being saved into the database, I will over here, okay, I will say publish to RabbitMQ for AI processing, something like this. Okay, and over here I'm going to make use of a try catch block. Okay, so I'll say try and catch. Over here I'll say exception E. Okay, something like this. Okay, so I'm adding an exception. Okay, try catch exception, and here I'm going to say so we need something called as rabbit template. Okay, Now, what is Rabbit template? Rabbit template is something that we get access to. So if you scroll up, let me add Rabbit template. Okay, so I'll say private final Rabbit template, and I'll say Rabbit template. Okay, now if you go over here, this is actually, let me download the sources. This is actually a class over here. You can see this is a class that helps us synchronize RabbitMQ access. So you can send and receive messages using this. So that is what I have added over here. Now this will get auto-wired because I have this required args constructor, right? So it will get auto-wired and you don't have to worry about it. And you'll make use of this. So I'm going to say Rabbit template dot convert and send. And you have this, you can see you have various versions of convert and send. Now convert and send accepts parameters. So what we are going to do is we are going to make use of this third one, wherein we specify the exchange, routing key, and the object. Okay, so we have exchange, then we need the routing key, and then we have the object. Now what is the object? Object is the saved activity, the activity after it's getting saved. Okay, and then I can say log dot error. If there is any sort of error, I'm going to say fail to publish activity to RabbitMQ over here. Okay, and I'm going to publish E over here. Oh, something like this. Okay, and now this log is throwing error over here, so I'll get this annotation SL F4J. Okay, so this error will go away. Okay, so this is taken care of. All right, and now what I would do is let us try running the application and let us see if it's working fine. Okay, so here I will come over here to Eureka. Okay, so let us start all the services one by one. So I'll start Eureka server first. Then let me start the activity service also. So I'll start the activity service. Okay, so I get the error because I made changes to pom.xml, and I'll head over to settings, and in annotation processing I have to make sure that for activity service I am selecting obtain processors from class path. I'll say apply. Okay, and I'll restart this again. Okay, if even after changing this setting, if it doesn't work, just go to rebuild over here, just go to build and just rebuild the project and it should work. All right, and you can see over here, okay, there are no issues as such. Let me see any issues over here. No issues as such, right? No issues over here. Okay, we have not got any sort of issues, and so we don't see anything over here because we missed something. Okay, and we need to head over to application YAML. We have defined the RabbitMQ exchange names, queue names, and routing key, but we have not mentioned where our RabbitMQ is running. So we need to specify that. Okay, and for that I'll come over here. Okay, just below Mongo. So I'm going to say RabbitMQ. So RabbitMQ, and I'm going to specify host. Okay, and then I'm going to specify port over here. Then we'll have a username and password, and we will, I think this should be it. Okay, so let me come over here and let me say localhost over here. What is the port? So it's running on 5672. Okay, that is where we are running. I'll add a guest and I'll add guest over here. Okay, and let me now rerun this activity service and let us see if we are able to establish a connection. Okay, so we'll wait for a while. I'm not seeing any sort of connection activity happening with RabbitMQ, and here also I'm not seeing anything in connections. So what we will do is we will try to trigger the API. Okay, let us see if the connection is triggered then. Okay, so here we have the configuration and everything set up, and here we are actually triggering RabbitMQ here in this track activity service. Okay, so I'll just do a call over here to this particular endpoint. So where's the postman? So I have postman over here, right? So this is a postman, and what I will do is I will trigger this endpoint. And before triggering this, remember that this endpoint also has a dependency on user service, right? So we are validating the user over here, right? This user is being validated. So you need user service also up and running. So I'll just start the user service as well. Okay, because otherwise we'll start getting errors. And after you start user service, just wait for a while because it will take some time to register with Eureka server, and then it will be a known service to everyone in the network. Okay, so we'll wait for a while until we trigger the request, because if we trigger the request until the registration is propagated, we will get the user not found or any sort of exception, because the service is just registered and it takes some time to propagate. So now I'll come over here to Postman and wait a minute. So I'll just clear all the logs over here, okay, from activity service, and I'll just expand this way. I'll come over here. I'll just send this request. So the request is triggered and you can see I got 200 okay. Now let me come over here. Okay, so I got some logs definitely. Now here, if you see, you have, if you see over here, initializing dispatcher servlet, if you see over here, caching, okay. And here, you can see there is some log for RabbitMQ connection. So you can see the connection was established over here, okay, with the port 5672. You can see this part over here. So the connection was established, but there was an error. So we get an error and the error says no exchange called fitness.exchange was found. Okay, so the message was not published to RabbitMQ because there was no exchange with this name. So we'll come over here in the dashboard, and now here in the overview, you should see a connection over here. So this is the connection that has happened. Earlier there was no connection. Now we are seeing one connection because our app has connected to RabbitMQ. You can go to exchange and we'll add an exchange over here. It is fitness.exchange and we'll keep the type as direct, and I'll say add the exchange. Okay, so the exchange is added. Okay, now if you come over here, okay, so here you have this queue, okay, and if you go over here, you have the bindings and all, okay, you have the messages, okay. So here, if you see, if I say get messages, okay, so the queue is empty. There are no messages in the queue. All right, so we have the exchange created. Now let us try clearing the logs and let us try creating the activity again. Okay, so I'll publish this activity again. We get 200 okay. You come over here and now you can see there was no error, okay, as such. And if you come over here, if you go to connections here in the overview, you can see message rates and you can see a spike here, okay, which means one message was received at this time, okay, in the graph. You can see over here also queues is 1, exchanges are 8, and if you go to exchange, you have this exchange. If you go to queue, you have this queue. Just head over to the queue and say get messages. Okay, the queue is still empty. So I'm not seeing the message being pushed over to the queue, and there could be a reason for that. Okay, so if you come over here, in my opinion, the issue is basically having to do that exchange might not be bound to the queue. Okay, so we have defined this queue over here in the RabbitMQ config. Okay, we have this message converter, but we are not binding this queue to a particular exchange. So let's try doing that and let us see how this works. So I'll say bean over here, okay, and I'll say public direct exchange over here, and I'll say activity exchange, okay, exchange, okay, all right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say return new direct exchange. Since this is a direct exchange, I'm going to call this as fitness exchange. Okay, just be sure to not make any sort of spelling mistakes, because if you make any sort of typos over here, okay, then there could be some problems. Okay, so I'll have bean over here, and then again I'll say public binding. I'll create a binding over here, and I'll make use of this EQMP core, okay, EQMP core package, and I'll say activity binding over here, and I'll say queue over here, and I'll say activity queue, and I'll say direct exchange, and here we will have activity exchange, something like this. Okay, so this is done, and what we will do is new binding builder over here. So binding builder, so this is the one that we should use, but not this one actually. Okay, so binding builder, so you have this binding builder dot bind over here. Okay, so you have this bind method, and I'm going to make use of queue over here. Okay, and wait a minute, let me add a return statement. So I'll add return, and this is throwing some sort of error, so cannot resolve bind. So binding builder should come in from 1 second. So is binding builder imported? No. So binding builder, Okay, so binding builder should come in from EMQP core. Okay, and you can see, so it is still giving me this error. So if I go over here, okay, so it's a class. 1 second. So let me get rid of this new over here. Okay, now it will work. Okay, so the reason is because this bind over here, okay, it cannot be referred to as new over here. Okay, I'm not able to find bind over here, but if you go to bind like this, okay, so this is static, if you can see, right? So you are not allowed to make use of new keyword, which I was making use of. All right, so the error is gone, and I can say to over here, and we have to specify the exchange over here, which is activity exchange dot with, and I'll specify the with over here, and I'll say activity dot tracking, something like this. Okay, so this is done, and this is the routing key. So if you come over here, okay, activity dot key is the routing key. All right, and what you can actually do is if you come over here to service, we are getting these from the YAML file, right? So you can actually come over here in RabbitMQ config, and you can actually get these values rather than hard coding it this way. You can get it like this from the YAML file, right? So you have the exchange name, and you can also have the queue name. So I'll just duplicate this, something like this over here. So RabbitMQ exchange name, right? So this is RabbitMQ queue name. Okay, so I'll come over here. This will be queue over here, and this will be queue. Okay, something like this. Okay, now instead of making use of hard-coded value over here, I'll make use of queue. Instead of making use of exchange over here, I'll make use of exchange, something like this. And instead of making use of routing key this way over here, I'll make use of routing key, something like this. Okay, so this is taken care of. So what we are doing is we are actually getting the exchange, and we are binding it to the routing key over here. You can see everything is binded now. So we have queue, exchange, and routing key. Right, now let us try running this. So I'm going to stop the activity service now. Okay, and let me start the application again. Okay, so I'm starting the application again. I'll reload. Okay, it says reload because there were some changes in the classes. I'll restart again just in case if it's not picked up. So I'm restarting activity service, and now let us see if this is working absolutely okay. All right, so I'll just clear the logs over here. I'll just come over here, and I'll just trigger this request to create a new activity. Come over here. You can see there are no issues as such, right? So connection was established. Now if you go to overview, okay, let me do a refresh. You can see like there are queued messages. There is one message that is queued, right? And if you go to exchanges, queues over here, if you go to queues inside, you can see there is one message that is ready. So under messages, you will see one message that is ready, and there is total of one message. Okay, so go inside this queue. You'll see this graph over here. Go over here, and here under get messages, you can say get messages, and you will see the entire payload over here. So this is the message that you have received on this exchange with this routing key. Okay, and this is the entire payload, and this is the payload that is coming in. This is actually our activity, right? So if you copy this, and if you go to Google, and if you say JSON lint over here, and if you format this JSON over here like this, validate JSON, and if you zoom in, you will see that this is basically the data that we have sent, right, from the backend, right? So this is the data, and we can make use of this now. Okay, this is there in the exchange residing here, and this is in RabbitMQ. Now the other service can basically listen to this queue, and it can process these messages one by one depending on or as time permits. So this is very asynchronous communication. The message has been published to RabbitMQ. All right. Yes, there was some ups and downs, some issues with the configuration, but you know, when it comes to softwares, nothing is perfect. You know, you have to like debug, and that is why I have purposely not edited this or not re-recorded this, because you know I want to explain, or I want to show you the debugging process as well, and how you build softwares. Okay, so it's completely normal. Don't stress out. I'm not trying to paint a perfect picture over here that, hey, you know, like this is how I can code without any sort of issues. There can be issues, there will be issues, you will forget something, you will miss something, but ultimately the point is you should understand what is happening, right? And you have to build things. So yeah, that's about RabbitMQ and publishing messages. I hope this has been useful. Now, once we have the data on the message queue, what we need to do is we need to consume this message in the AI service. So here we have this AI service. Okay, so this is the activity service. We have AI service as well, which should be consuming the messages that is being posted by activity service. And when I say consuming the message, what we are consuming over here, we are getting this data, which is the activity that has been posted against a specific user. And we have all the details that we need, like user ID, activity ID, the type of activity, and everything that is updated, right? So what we will be doing is we will be making use of this, okay, and we will be writing a listener over here in this particular AI service. Okay, so to write the listener, first thing we need is we need the dependency. So I'll get this dependency, which is the RabbitMQ dependency. So I'll just copy this. Okay, and you can see Spring for RabbitMQ. This is what I've added over here, and I've copied this dependency tag and come over here, go to AI service and simply add this dependency in the pom.xml and just do a Maven reload. Okay, once this is done, you have all the classes that you need. Okay, so you come over here into main, and here you will need to create a configuration in the config package, and also you will have to create a configuration in the YAML file. So come over here in YAML, and here what you can do is here you just copy this RabbitMQ thing, okay, this entire connection details over here, and also add this the way in which this service can connect to RabbitMQ. Okay, so here I'll come and just below MongoDB, I'll paste this over here. Okay, so this is done. We have the RabbitMQ settings set over here in application.yaml. Okay, so I'll just close this. Now what we need is we need the RabbitMQ config again. Okay, so here in the com.fitness.ai service.config package, this package that we have, we need the RabbitMQ config, right? So we have the RabbitMQ config created for activity service. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it over here. Okay, so I have this RabbitMQ config now over here as well. All right, so the configuration part is done. Now what I will do is I will create a listener that will listen to any sort of message that is being posted in the particular queue, and once the message is posted, it will retrieve that message. And what we will be doing right now is we won't be processing the message, but we will be taking the message and we'll be printing it onto the console. And that's the idea right now. The idea right now is to print it onto the console and show you as to how you can read the message from a queue. And whenever a new message is being posted, it will come over to the AI service. And then later on, we can take that message. So once we have the data, you can take it later on and you can forward it basically to any sort of other service and you can process it. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. So here under service package, I will create a new Java class over here. Okay, now what is this class name? This is activity message listener. Okay, so I'm going to call this activity message listener over here. Okay, and this is a listener that will listen to all the messages that are being posted in a particular queue. Okay, so I'll mark this as a service. I'll also have SLF4J and I'll have required args construct over here, something like this. Okay, now here I'm going to say private final, and here I am so let me not create any sort of variables or objects over here, okay, because we are just logging the data right now, right? So what I will do is I'll create a method over here. I'll say public void and I'll say process, so I'll say process activity, something like this, and I'll have activity over here. Okay, so activity does not exist yet, okay, in this particular project. So what we need to do is we need to have a definition of what the activity looks like, right? So we need to have a definition for the same. So what I will do is I will come over here and here we have this recommendation. Okay, so I'll go to AI, I'll go to activity service and I'll get the structure of the activity. Now I'm getting this because we need a structure in which the activity is supposed to be represented or how the activity is received, right? So I'll paste it over here in the model. Okay, and I don't need, so I'm not actually persisting it into a database. I just need it for data transfer purpose. So I'll just get rid of all of this. I'll just have this data annotation. I'll just get rid of ID. Okay. Do we need activity type? I don't think we'll get rid of activity type. You can have activity type if you need, but I'm getting rid of it. Okay. I'll have additional metrics as well over here. I'll have local date and time, which is created time and updated time over here. Okay. So all these things I have over here. I'll just get rid of all the unnecessary import statements and I'll just optimize the imports. So this is done. Now over here, I'll just import this activity. Okay. And yeah, this is how the data is going to be received over here. Right. And now what I will do is I'll say log over here and I'll say info and I'll post a message over here, received activity for processing. And here you will have this and you'll add a comma and you'll say activity dot get ID, something like this. Okay. So I'm simply logging the activity that is received. Okay. Now I'll have to add a listener over here. So I'll just add a listener. I'll say rabbit listener. So you can see this rabbit listener over here. So there are two things, okay, two suggestions you're getting. I'll just pick the first one, which is rabbit listener, and I'll set up this listener for a particular queue. Now what is the queue that I'm listening to? So I'll have the queue name over here, and for queue name, what I will do is I will get it injected in this particular file, because the queue name is defined in application.yaml file. Okay, so I'll have queue over here. Okay, or let me call this as queue name, something like this. Okay, and here I'll say queue. Okay, this won't work over here. Okay, so variable is not working over here. So what I will do is I'll get rid of this, in fact, and here let me get rid of this, and here I'll just hard code it for now. I'll say activity dot queue, something like this. Okay, so this is done, I believe. Let me run this. Okay, so I'll just remove unused imports and let me refresh this AI service over here. Okay, so let me rerun the AI service. Okay, and let me see if it is able to process the activity that it's received for processing. Okay, so it's running in debug mode. Okay, and I'll just do a control F for this once we send the data. Okay, so you can see the moment I started this service, there was one message. Okay, so if you come over here, there was one message that was over here in the exchange. It was not processed. Okay, it was not processed. So the moment I started this activity, or sorry, not activity, the moment I started this service, you can see it read this particular message, and I have this right now on the logs. Okay, so you can see the ID over here was ending with A0F4. So you can see over here A0F4. This is what it read. Okay, so you can see this was a classic scenario that we simulated. Okay, so AI service was down. Okay, and we started AI service. After a while, the message was posted. So the message was posted some time back, and AI service was down at that time. And then I started the AI service, and then what happened is AI service picked up. It went to the exchange. It picked up all the messages that was there, and there was only one message, so it printed this onto the console. Right now, if I post one more message from here, okay, you will see that message appear over here. You can see this message appear. There is one more message that appears. So this was the older one, and now there is a new one. It is A0F5. Okay, and if you come over here, you will see the spike over here. Right, so the message is being read also. Okay, and if you go over here to queues, and if you go to the queue, if you say get message, you'll see the queue is empty. Why it is empty? Because the message is consumed by the listener over here. Right, now once the message is received in the activity service, it's the job of this service to decide what needs to be done. So this is how you can actually have a asynchronous communication wherein a message is being published by one service, which is activity service, and the message is being read by another service, which is the AI service. Okay, and there you have a listener which is listening to the queue over here using this rabbit listener annotation. Right, so I hope this has been useful, and I hope you were able to follow along.